Welcome to this Lab 7 pre-lab video, and this will be covering the digestive and endocrine systems. Let's get started just taking a look at the basic ideas of the digestive system. That is, the digestive system is responsible for ingesting food, taking the food in, transporting that food through a series of tube-like structures. Along the way, that food is digested, that is, it's broken down. It will be absorbed through the intestines into the bloodstream, and those food products which are not useful will be expelled upon defecation. There are two groups of organs found within the digestive system. One are the actual digestive organs. These are the organs through which food actually passes. And then there's a series of accessory digestive organs. These are the organs that are assisting, contributing to the digestive process. Collectively, all of these organs make up the digestive system, also referred to as the gastrointestinal or the GI tract. You may also hear this referred to as the alimentary canal. Aliment, recall from our vocabulary, refers to nutrition. So this is the nutrient canal. Let's take a look at these organs. This diagram is broken into two halves. We have the digestive organs on the right. So this would be the path that food would take through your body. Also, I want you to think for a second that everything from mouth to anus, as food and food products are passing through the digestive system, they actually are not inside your body. Think about it, right? It's like a donut with a hole in the middle, or a tube that you might go down the river in. There's a big hole in the center. And if you're in that hole, you're not actually, inside the tube, you're passing through the tube. So food that is passing from mouth to anus is really, quote, outside of the body, even though it's passing through this long digestive tube. So food is traveling into the oral cavity. It's going to go into and go down into the pharynx, which is a fancy word for the throat. From there, it's going to enter into the esophagus. The esophagus is a really interesting structure. The top 1/3 or so of the esophagus is skeletal muscle. That is, you have complete control over it. We've all been swallowing something, and we have control toward the superior portion of our esophagus. As you get into about the middle third of the esophagus, it's about a 50-50 split. And it transitions from going from skeletal muscle to all smooth muscle. And then the bottom third and the rest of the digestive system is characterized by smooth muscle, over which we have no control. So as you begin to swallow, you might swallow a pill or something, and you can feel it in the top of your esophagus. You're swallowing, you're trying to push that down, but there comes a point where you don't have control over it anymore. So as that food moves to the middle or to the inferior portion of the esophagus, we lose voluntary control over trying to move that food. The food is going to drop into the stomach. We'll talk about the parts of the stomach in a moment. The stomach is where the food will be digested in part. It's where the stomach will add acid and additional enzymes to break down food products. Then the food products, which at this point are no longer what we would recognize, but as food leaves the stomach, it has been broken down into a liquidy, pasty-like substance called chyme. And that chyme is going to enter into the small intestine. The first part of that small intestine is the duodenum. From the duodenum, the food is going to move into the rest of the small intestine. The middle part is called the jejunum, and the far end is called the ileum. I do want you to note the spelling of ileum. It is I-L-E-U-M. This would be different from the ileum that you learned how to spell in the pelvis. From the small intestine, now the food is going to travel into the large intestine, and the first part of the large intestine is the cecum. The cecum has hanging off from it the appendix. From here, these food products are going to go through the large intestine, also called the colon, and this is going to involve going up the ascending colon, across the transverse colon, down the descending colon, and finally through the curved section called the sigmoid or the sigmoidal colon. Before it reaches this straight region called the rectum. From here, there's just a short anal canal, and now leaves out the anus. The anus contains at least two different sphincters. There's an internal sphincter. The internal sphincter is composed of smooth muscle. It is the sphincter that, as feces are pressing against that smooth muscle, gives you the urge to go to the restroom. And then further along is the external anal sphincter, and this is the one that is made of skeletal muscle, over which hopefully you have control. So on the right-hand side, those are the tube-like structures through which food actually travels. Now let's take a quick look at the accessory organs. These are additional organs along the digestive system. They are contributing to the digestive process in some way or another. And these include the salivary glands. Parotid gland is the largest of the glands. Then there are submandibular glands, and there are sublingual glands. These glands are producing saliva. We'll talk about those in a moment. In addition, you have the teeth. We'll talk about teeth in a moment as well. There is, in the adult, 32 teeth. You'll learn how to name and recognize those teeth. And there's a large muscle of mastication, that is the tongue. You learned last week that the tongue is controlled by cranial nerve 12, the hypoglossal nerve. The saliva is contributing to the food as it is masticated by the teeth, rolled around by the tongue. You learned last week that the salivary glands are controlled by two cranial nerves. The release of saliva from the parotid gland is controlled by the 9th cranial nerve. And sublingual and submandibular glands are controlled by the 7th cranial nerve, the facial nerve. Additionally, the liver, the largest abdominal organ in your body, has dozens and dozens of different features. You're going to be hearing about the liver in a number of places, but for now, we will talk about the liver releasing a substance called bile. Bile is a substance that will help to break down and emulsify fats. That bile is produced by the liver and will be stored in the gallbladder until needed and released. The gallbladder is shown here as this green organ. It's on the inferior surface of the liver. You're going to see the gallbladder very clearly in your fetal pig dissections. And then lastly, related to the digestive system is the pancreas. Now, the pancreas is the one organ that really ties together these two labs, or these two systems, I should say, that are included in this lab, the digestive and the endocrine system. The pancreas, most folks think of the pancreas as being a hormone-producing gland where insulin is produced. But in fact, only a very small percentage of the pancreas is involved with making those hormones. The vast majority of the pancreatic function is related to releasing digestive enzymes that help break down food in the digestive process. So those are the accessory organs of the digestive system. Additionally, how are all of these organs held together? You'll be seeing in your lab manual reference to the lesser omentum. The lesser omentum is a connective tissue layer that is going to be found at the lesser curvature of the stomach and attach up to the bottom of the liver. So the lesser omentum fills this space. Meanwhile, the greater omentum is found below the greater curvature of the stomach and travels over the entire small intestine, sort of like a large apron. Additionally, when you get into your fetal pigs today, you're going to notice that the intestines are held together by a very, very thin layer. You can see right through it, and that is called a mesentery. So the mesentery is a very delicate connective tissue structure that holds the intestines in their proper place, gives them sort of a place for blood vessels and lymphatic structures to travel through and down into the intestinal organs, whereas the omenta are larger, fattier types of connective tissue. So I've already mentioned most of these structures, the GI tract organs. The digestive system is made up of about 30 feet of tubes from mouth to anus, pretty substantial amount of distance. Along the way, most of the way, there's smooth muscle. You do have skeletal muscle. You know about your orbicularis oris, right? Your lip muscle, if you will. And then the tongue is a voluntary muscle. The masseter and the other muscles of mastication in the oral cavity are skeletal muscles. And then about the top 1/3 of the esophagus is composed or surrounded by skeletal muscle. But after that, the digestive system quickly becomes the structure surrounded by smooth muscle. Now, at the other end, at the anus, also there's, once again, skeletal muscle. And then, like I said, the accessory organs do not form the tube itself, but are developed off from or offshoots from the digestive tube. Recall, too, we discussed in lecture that the digestive system is largely derived from that endoderm, right? Remember that inside layer of the early gastrula. So the digestive system, the great thing about the digestive system is that you know a lot about this system. This is a system we all experience every day. We eat. And even in early elementary years, you learned about the basic ideas of the digestive system. So whereby other systems may be new and unusual to you, I believe the digestive system is one that is rather straightforward. So let's just put a couple of new words perhaps to this. So to ingest is to take the food into the body. It's a voluntary process. Digestion is the breakdown of those nutrients. Mechanical would be what happens with mastication, with chewing, with the physical breakdown of the food by the teeth and the rolling around of the stomach. And then there's also chemical digestion, whereby enzymes are released. These enzymes start being released by the salivary glands in the oral cavity. Additional enzymes and acid are released in the stomach, and then there are additional enzymatic reactions that occur along the intestines. All of this is going to be breaking down those more complex macromolecules into smaller molecules, which then are absorbed. Remember that your small intestine is lined by that simple columnar epithelium. And along that simple columnar epithelium, there's nutrients being absorbed. Along the way, the nutrients are being propulsed through a process called peristalsis. Peristalsis is a rippling, contractile wave, if you will, throughout the GI tract. This wave is occurring at regular intervals time-wise and is largely controlled by hormones in your digestive system. Additionally, there's actually another process called segmentation, and this is like little blenders along the way. So segments of your intestines will sort of wall themselves off momentarily. The food products will then be blended in that segment, and this will help with the breakdown of nutrients as well. Along the way, like I mentioned, there's secretion of acid, bile from the liver, digestive juices from the stomach and the pancreas, and mucus, right? Good old goblet cells that we know are found along the digestive mucous membranes. And then, as I mentioned, you have all of those nutrients being absorbed across the GI epithelium. Recall, this is simple. It's going to be simple columnar most of the time. And it's across that simple columnar epithelium that there is both passive and active transport. You know what that means. That means that some nutrients are absorbed across from the intestines into the bloodstream, across those cells through a concentration gradient. But more often than not, it's moving across by active transport or facilitated diffusion. And these are processes that we've looked at before. Whatever is not useful is, of course, eliminated through defecation. Let's take a closer look at the stomach. Here is the esophagus. And right about here, there's a sphincter. A sphincter is a circular muscle group. In this case, this sphincter is usually closed down. The sphincter only opens up as food is coming down the esophagus. And that sphincter is called the lower esophageal sphincter. It is also referred to as the cardiac sphincter. The cardiac sphincter. And the reason is the first part of the stomach that receives the food as it comes down is called the cardiac region or the cardia. And so the sphincter is also called the cardiac sphincter. The stomach has a large dome-like area. This is referred to as the fundus. The majority of the stomach is simply referred to as the body. And then the bottom section or the last section of the stomach is referred to as the pylorus. Along the way and throughout the stomach, there are these gastric folds. This increases the surface area. I'll show you what these gastric folds look like more microscopically in a moment. I already mentioned that this is the lesser curvature, and here there would be the lesser omentum. Here is the greater curvature of the stomach, and there would be the greater omentum hanging down, much lower, going down to the over the intestines. The stomach is composed of 3 layers of muscle, and we'll see that's kind of unique. Most of the digestive system is classified or characterized as having 2 layers of muscle, but the stomach is unique in that it has 3. And what these 3 layers of muscle are allowing is for really the stomach to rock and roll, to really churn around the food particles. And so the outer layer is a longitudinal layer. There's a circular layer in the middle, and then finally there's an oblique layer on the inside. And you can see those fibers. You can see the fascicle fibers running in those different orientations. And again, that allows the stomach to really churn the food products. As the food products are coming into the stomach, the acids are released, the enzymes are released, and as I mentioned earlier, those food products are turned into a pasty substance called chyme. That chyme is, upon timing controlled largely by hormones, is going to be released from the stomach through a sphincter, the pyloric sphincter. Pyloric sphincter. And that is how the food products leave the pylorus. Once that chyme leaves the pyloric sphincter, the chyme is now in the first part of the small intestine, referred to as the duodenum. You'll also hear duodenum, but the duodenum or the duodenum, I'll flip back and forth in my pronunciation. Those gastric pits that I mentioned, so on the surface it just looks like these deep folds, but here those folds really are creating these deep gastric pits. And we won't get into the specifics of this, but I just want you to realize that it's down in these pits that some cells, we're not going to worry about naming them, but some cells deep in these gastric pits are producing that acid, and others release hormones, and others release enzymes. And so there's lots of activity of materials coming up. Also notice the rich vascular supply, okay, that is associated with the stomach. There are layers, major layers found throughout the alimentary canal. And those 4 layers are, let me introduce them here, the mucosa, the submucosa, the muscularis, and the serosa. Now, the mucosa would be this entire bracketed area. It's the mucous membrane, and you know that the mucous membranes we've been describing in the histology sections and in lecture are the epithelial layers lining the inside of the digestive system. And so the mucosa layer includes the entirety of these gastric pits. There's also lymphatic vessels in here that you'll learn about later. And there's even a little layer of muscle at the base of the mucosa. So it's called the muscularis mucosae. Okay, so that is the mucosa in total, but you are fine to think of it being primarily the simple columnar epithelium that you've come to know and love and recognize under the microscope. Underneath that, there is a very significant layer of blood vessels, as well as some nerve endings, and that is what is making up the submucosa. So underneath the mucosa, there's a submucosa. That's where you have blood vessels and some nerves. Then you have the muscularis. Now, in the case of the stomach, again, there's 3 layers, the oblique, the circular, and the longitudinal. And then finally, on the outside of the stomach, the layer is called the serosa. And you might recognize that that term is just sort of a variation on serous membrane. So recall that the digestive organs have wrapped around them the peritoneum, a serous membrane. So if I were to point to this, right, I could also say, hey, that is the peritoneum, the visceral peritoneum. But in naming these layers, we're going to call that the serosa. Here's another section. This is not of the stomach, but simply of a portion of the intestine. And it's the same idea. There is the mucous membrane, the mucosa. Your intestines are not flat like a hose, but are filled with these ripples, this large surface area that you see. In fact, you saw that in your histology. You remember whenever you saw the simple columnar epithelium of the intestine, always was folded over on each other. So you kind of get an idea of that here. Then there is that layer of blood vessels. I'm going to change colors here. I'm going to make it, I think we'll see purple pretty well. But you can see that this would be the submucosal area, and that's where all those blood vessels are. Then there's the layer of muscle, the muscularis. Note here, there is not an oblique layer, but there's simply the inner circular layer and the outer longitudinal layer. And that's what you're going to find throughout the digestive system, a double layer of muscle. Again, this is going to allow that process called peristalsis, as these 2 layers sort of dance and contract in a rhythmic way. And then finally, the outer layer, the serosa. So do know those 4 layers, right? From inside out, mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, serosa. Here it is again, right? Just to help you with this. So the mucosa right? The mucosa is that epithelial layer that was the simple columnar epithelium, and then that muscularis layer at the base of that. So that is all mucosa. Then submucosa, then the muscularis layer, and tell you what, let's just cross off this propria term. Just call that the muscularis for simplicity. And then the outside layer. Now, a moment ago, I called it the serosa, and that is true. Sometimes this outer layer is called an adventitia. An adventitia. The difference is this. When there is a serous membrane wrapped around the organ, if there's a serous membrane, that is, if there's any of the peritoneum, then the outer layer is called a serosa. But there are some sections of the intestinal organs that are not surrounded by the peritoneum. And in that case, the outer layer can't be called a serosa, can it? If it's not a serous membrane, it can't be called a serosa. So the name is changed to the adventitia. To me, that word looks like I'm going on an adventure. So I'm outside of the normal area and outside of the peritoneum. When I'm on that adventure, I am going to be surrounded by the adventitia. And then this other picture shows you this idea of the layers again. And this one shows you the muscle layers, right? And you have that thin layer, the muscularis of the mucosal layer. Then you have the submucosal layer. Then you have that double smooth muscle layer, the muscularis, and then the blue layer. Now notice here, once again, it tells you that if it is surrounded by the serous membrane, that it's serosa, and that just underneath that and everywhere else, you would have this adventitia. The teeth are important accessory organs. I'm not going to have you worry about the dates of eruption or the ages of eruption. That just may be of interest to you if you have kids or nieces or nephews that you are following their development. In the primary teeth, you might see those primary teeth called deciduous teeth, milk teeth, baby teeth, all the same thing. There are 20 teeth, right? So a full mouth of a young child, 20 teeth. Whereas in the adult, there are 32 teeth, right? So I want you to be able to name these teeth. So in the front, there are 4 incisors, right? You've got 2 front incisors and 2 lateral incisors, top and bottom. Then you have a pair of canines on either side. And then you have a couple of premolars, first and second premolars, and then you have your first, second, and third molars. So definitely know the naming of those teeth around the adult. We won't worry about the numbering of them or anything else, but just know the location and the names of those teeth. So I've already given you these answers, right? But do be able to label the adult teeth. The salivary glands are fascinating. We are making somewhere between half a liter and a liter of saliva every day. This saliva is known to be antimicrobial. It fights off bacteria. It's antiviral. It helps to coat our teeth and our oral cavity. It provides growth factors to assure that if our epithelial cells of our mouth get cut or burned, that they heal quickly. There are also enzymes released in the saliva. So it really is a very, very important substance. Oh, and one more thing. It coats the teeth, which helps to keep sugar and other bacteria, other things off our teeth, which helps to release the bacteria that are coating our teeth, right? And those bacteria can lead to caries, to cavities. And so a person who has a salivary gland disorder where they're not making adequate spit, right, not only are they always having a dry mouth, but they also see a huge increase in the number of cavities because the bacteria and the sugars are not being washed off the teeth in a regular way. The parotid gland, okay, here's the parotid gland, and here's that big masseter muscle that you've learned to identify. And there's a parotid duct, and it comes in and dumps right around your second molars. Okay, so this is an area where a lot of tartar and calculus builds up in the oral cavity when you're having your teeth cleaned. This can be a trouble area because there's a lot of protein in the secretions, and that can build up and lead to some of that buildup of gunk around our gum line in our teeth. Additionally, the submandibular and the sublingual glands, they are releasing their products in ducts up under the tongue and behind those lower incisors. And again, if you're having your teeth cleaned, the inside of those lower incisors can be a tough space, right? Back behind those teeth, again, because of all the release of the proteins and substances in the saliva that can build up and cause some extra struggle, right, with flossing and cleaning. And again, which cranial nerves are involved? I mentioned that it is the glossopharyngeal nerve, right? The ninth nerve that controls salivation of the parotid gland, and it is the facial nerve, the seventh nerve, that controls the innervation of the sublingual and submandibular glands. The liver, shown here. There are 4 lobes in the liver. You'll be seeing that in your lab materials. I don't have another view of the liver here, but there are the large right and left lobes of the liver. On the underside of the liver, one finds the gallbladder. And the gallbladder, let's talk about that for a moment. There are 2 ducts, the right and left. Let me get a better color. There's the right and the left hepatic ducts. They are receiving the bile, right? These are releasing bile. The bile is being made by the liver, and the liver is releasing that bile down these hepatic ducts. These 2 ducts, the right and left hepatic ducts, meet to form the common hepatic duct. Right? That's not so hard. The common hepatic duct. But here's what's interesting. That bile that is being made by your liver all the time, most of it kind of backflows and goes into the gallbladder. And the gallbladder is going to receive and is going to concentrate that bile. Then, when you need it, there are some hormonal signals that will cause the gallbladder to contract. And now that bile will leave out of this cystic duct. I didn't label that, but this duct here is the cystic duct going over to the gallbladder. And that bile will be released through the cystic duct and then go into this, the actual bile duct. Okay? And the bile duct will then bring this bile down, and it will drip into and be released into the duodenum. Now, where it is released is called the major duodenal papilla. And I had you add that word into your list of structures for this week. So the duodenal papilla, now we know from the vocab, and we saw a papillary structure in the skin. Papilla is a nipple-shaped structure. And so there's this little nipple-shaped drip spout right here that is where the bile duct dumps into the duodenum. Now, there's always a little bit of this bile being released through this minor duodenal papilla. So the minor duodenal papilla is always releasing and receiving the bile. The major duodenal papilla is more hormonally controlled. In addition to the bile coming down the bile duct and dropping off into the duodenal papilla, the pancreas is also releasing its products. And the pancreas is releasing its products through the bile duct. Sorry, the pancreatic duct. My bad. So the pancreatic duct. So the pancreas is releasing these enzymes, and they are meeting up right here into the pancreatic duct, and they too are being released into the duodenum. Now the pancreas is mostly releasing enzymes into the digestive system, and some people will refer to this function of the pancreas as the exocrine pancreas because it is excreting. We know crine means to secrete, exo, out of the body. So these enzymes are being released out of the body. Remember that things that are within the digestive system will be released out of the body. So I just mentioned the exocrine pancreas. That is the majority of the pancreatic function-releasing enzymes. But the pancreas is also a major endocrine organ, and that is there are other structures within the pancreas that are releasing hormones like insulin and glucagon. And we'll talk about those a little bit in lecture. Also included on this image, and it's not officially part of the digestive system, but it is always showing up on digestive models. You will also see it in your fetal pig in the dissection, is the spleen. Now, the spleen is a significant lymphatic organ. We will look at the lymphatic system in a future lab, and the spleen will come back into that conversation. But just know that the spleen is in close proximity to the pancreas, and you will see it in many diagrams. But it is not a part of the digestive system. So that's the digestive system. The last thing you need to worry about in this unit is now to turn back to exercise 16 in the Green Lab Manual and learn the endocrine organs. In this course, we're not going to be focusing on any of the hormones, what the hormones do, the timing of those hormones. Those conversations will be a significant part of Biology 106 or a future course. However, the identification of the organs and their location is what you need to worry about. So in the brain, we're looking at the brain, there's the pineal gland. Okay, the pineal gland is in the shape of a pine cone, and so it has that name, pineal gland. There's also the hypothalamus. That's a region that you saw in the brain anatomy last week. That's underneath the thalamus. So here's the thalamus. There's the thalamus. And then underneath that, this triangular region is the hypothalamus. And then hanging down from the hypothalamus is the pituitary gland. Now, for most of you in your sheep brains dissection, the pituitary gland did not make it. So you probably didn't see that in your dissections, but you saw it mentioned in many of your readings and diagrams. In the throat, one finds this butterfly-shaped gland, the thyroid gland. On the posterior portion of the thyroid, there are little tiny dot-like glands. These are the parathyroid glands. We've already talked about those in the skeletal system. Remember, we talked about how parathyroid hormone and calcitonin are released by these glands. So where I have specifically discussed hormones, that is fair for you to know those, but I'm not asking you to know additional hormones related to these glands. There is a very important gland that is important in the development of your immune system called the thymus. Here it is very large. You're not going to find a thymus anywhere near that size in an adult. This gland is actually associated with the heart, is much larger relatively in an infant, but as an adult, it's a very, very small, involuted or reduced in size organ. The kidneys actually release a number of hormones. We'll learn about those in the urinary system. On the superior border of the kidneys, one finds the adrenal glands. You see them here. The pancreas I just mentioned. In the female, the ovary. In the male, the testis, singular testis, are also hormone-producing glands. So definitely know the location of and be able to label these endocrine glands. In this lab today, you will be dissecting a fetal pig. You'll be following the protocols in the dissection rubric that is provided for you separately. You'll be looking at exercises 1 and 6 in the lab manual. This will be your uploaded lab activity. For the quiz next week, make sure that you know a detailed flow of the organs through the GI tract. Make sure you know the parts of the stomach. Make sure you know the 3 parts of the small intestine, the 4 parts of the large intestine. Know the rectum, know the 2 anal sphincters. Know the sphincters that separate. For example, went through the lower esophageal sphincter, the cardiac sphincter, the pyloric sphincter. Know the accessory organs as I just described them, and then also be able to recognize these organs and those endocrine organs on various models or images that are provided in your manuals or at Lab Atlas.